halls of thought we wander, through the twilight of the mind. Empiricism in a corner where dogmas are confined. Analytic or synthetic lines, cracking at the seams. Where is truth when it's defined by old scholars' dreams? Warn us of the dogmas that keep us in a cage. Quine breaks all the chains now, flipping every page. Meaning born of context, truth is but on questions we dissect down, put to the test. Radical translation, no certain foundation. Every proposition caught in deviation. Translation, no certain foundation. Every proposition caught in deviation. Warn us of the dogmas that keep us in a cage. Quine breaks all the chains now, flipping every page. Translation, no certain foundation. Every proposition caught in deviation. Living every page. Deviation. Caught in deviation.
One of context. Truth is but questions we dissect, dealt put to the test. Radical translation, no certain foundation. Every proposition caught in deviation. Questions we dissect, dealt put to the test. Radical translation, no certain take-down quest. Questions we dissect, don't put to the test. Radical translation, no certain foundation. Every proposition caught in deviation. Radical translation, no certain foundation. Every proposition caught in deviation. Radical translation, no certain foundation. Every proposition caught in deviation.
It's beyond ironic that David Hume's skeptical empiricism shows one thing, and one thing only, without a shred of doubt, namely, that empiricism is impossible.
Because it has no point anymore, and because we dare not engage in the empirical observation in the first place, because we're afraid where it might lead us. This collapse of induction, and ultimately therefore of empiricism, is a certain sign of our society's slow descent into barbarianism.
The problem with the empirical approach, the problem with totalizing it, is that the empirical approach tends to be mostly descriptions of things and the way they interact and the way they can be manipulated. And that's fine, but it doesn't tell you.
Lewis starts out somewhat famously saying, seeing is not believing. The mentality, or maybe a motto of the contemporary empirical philosophy, in empiricism here means the idea that our reason is limited to that which we can sense and touch and measure and describe.
The term empiricism has its roots in the ancient Greek word empiria, which translates to experience. This concept, emphasizing the importance of experience and observation in acquiring knowledge, has been present in various philosophical and scientific traditions throughout history. However, the term empiricism, in its modern philosophical sense, emerged during the 17th century. It was closely associated with the British empiricist philosophers, including John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume. These thinkers argued that all knowledge originates from experience, rejecting the notion of innate ideas or a priori truths. It's important to note that while the term empiricism gained prominence during this period, the underlying idea of relying on experience and observation has been a cornerstone of scientific inquiry since ancient times.
Logical positivism, a prominent philosophical movement of the early 20th century, sought to establish a rigorous foundation for knowledge by emphasizing empirical verification and logical analysis. Central to this philosophy was the verification principle, which asserted that a statement is only meaningful if it is either empirically verifiable or analytically true. This principle led logical positivists to reject metaphysical speculation as meaningless, focusing instead on concrete, observable phenomena. By advocating for a unified science, they aimed to bridge the gap between different disciplines, seeking to apply the same rigorous methods to all areas of inquiry. This approach sought to provide a comprehensive and objective understanding of the world, grounded in both empirical evidence and logical reasoning. However, logical positivism, while influential, faced significant criticisms. Many argued that its strict verification principle was overly restrictive, excluding important areas of philosophical inquiry, such as ethics and aesthetics. Additionally, the movement's emphasis on empirical observation and logical analysis was seen by some as neglecting the role of intuition and imagination in human understanding. Despite these criticisms, logical positivism remains a significant milestone in the history of philosophy, shaping the development of analytic philosophy and continuing to influence contemporary thought.
Int. Study Day, a lone figure, W.V. Quine, sits at a cluttered desk surrounded by stacks of books and papers. He pauses, pen hovering over a notebook. Quine, Mathematics, a Curious Tool. A collection of ideograms, symbols that behave as if they held meaning. But do they truly? Quine scribbles a complex equation. Quine, we derive theorems, build intricate structures, yet the foundation remains questionable. Is it a realm of truth or merely a useful fiction? A younger Quine appears in a flashback, a look of youthful idealism in his eyes. Young Quine, Mathematics, a tool, no more, no less. Its value lies in its application, its ability to illuminate the natural world. The scene shifts back to the present, QuineOpens. As I matured, my perspective evolved. I embraced the existence of mathematical objects, their indispensability to our understanding of the physical world. Yet, a lingering doubt persisted. Quine picks up a book, Set Theory, and its philosophy, QuineOpens. Higher set theory, a labyrinth of abstraction devoid of practical application. A mere intellectual pastime, a testament to human curiosity, but ultimately a detour from the path of scientific inquiry.
Willard Van Orman Quine, Professor Emeritus at Harvard University, has been described as the greatest living English-speaking philosopher.
Science itself, certainly philosophy, certainly my interest in foundations of mathematics, has very much the same structure, the strange way home. In a case of foundations of mathematics, the layman who's going to be a staunch, naive realist, I expect finds it difficult to put himself in the state of mind where you're wondering about the reality of things. There was a time when I thought of ontology as being somehow the very deepest core of philosophy, and I no longer see it that way because of the by developing views on what really amounts to the epistemology of ontology.
Why did you decide to go to Harvard?
Because of Principia Mathematica, I had developed this great admiration for that tremendous 3-volume work in mathematical logic, and Whitehead was one of the 2 authors. Whitehead.
Quine's doctoral dissertation, A System of Logistic, 1934, was a foundational work in logic, building on the work of Whitehead and Russell's Principia Mathematica. Quine aimed to formalize logic into a more rigorous and streamlined system, eliminating unnecessary complexities and making it more accessible and efficient. He emphasized the principle of extensionality, which states that the meaning of a concept is determined by its extension, or the set of objects it applies to. Additionally, he introduced the distinction between the use and mention of symbols, a fundamental concept in formal logic and philosophy of language. Furthermore, Quine sought to eliminate intensional definitions, which rely on the meaning or connotation of terms, in favor of extensional definitions, making the logical system more objective and less reliant on subjective interpretations. Quine's work had a lasting impact on the development of logic and philosophy of language, with his emphasis on extensionality, the use of mention distinction, and the elimination of intentional definitions, becoming influential concepts in subsequent logical and philosophical work.
When you arrived in Vienna, you were one of only 2 Anglophones who were invited to join the circle. Tell us a bit about the members of the circle.
Yes, a leading figure there, I would say Carnap, except that Carnap had already moved on to Prague. He did come to Vienna, was the use of modern logic, mathematical logic, especially at the hands of Carnap. One could also say Gödel, but Gödel wasn't pursuing the philosophy of it. Another conspicuous feature and notorious feature from the American point of view at that time was their condemnation of metaphysics as meaningless. That was their positivism in the narrow sense of the word, as I take it.
The significance of the new logic ends with a description of Gödel's proof and Quine's estimation of its philosophical significance. Again, Quine stressed that the proof entailed that neither logical nor mathematical truth could be taken to consist in probability. No formulation of the notion of theorem can cover all of the true statements that can be formulated even in this very restricted notation of elementary arithmetic, without also covering false statements. The same is true of fortiori for our logical notation, since it is capable of expressing arithmetic and much more. He pointed out that even the potential infinite is affected by this problem. Carnap's notes from the previous year reveal that both Quine and Tarski had qualms about the potential infinite and Carnap's reliance on a notion of possibility. Quine then described the upshot of Gödel's proof as a victory for those who obstinately refused to recognize abstract objects, Quine 1944, page 234, because, he claimed, it points to a W.V. Quine's philosophical development, F. Jansen-Lauret, in The Significance of the New Logic, Cup 2018, Conception of Mathematics as a Useful Tool Without Content in the Full Sense. Instead of a theory composed of true or false statements, mathematics draws ideograms, which behave as though they have meaning because of our use of the methods of the theory of quantification, whose meaning still remains unquestioned in deriving theorems from the axioms we assume. The book, then, ends on a note best described as a kind of instrumentalism about classical mathematics. Mathematics is justified by its usefulness, presumably the fruitful applications to the natural sciences he had invoked earlier in the book. But the statements of classical mathematics, which presuppose infinite ranges of abstract objects, are not taken to truly or falsely describe anything of an abstract nature. As he grew out of his finitistic and nominalistic inclinations, Quine swore off the instrumentalist treatment of mathematics. Still, there are some points of contact with his mature philosophy. Although Quine's later indispensability arguments do admit the existence of abstract mathematical posits, their justification still invokes their usefulness to the natural sciences, specifically to physics. The mature Quine no longer abjured the literal truth of classical or infinitistic mathematics generally. Accordingly, his nominalistic leanings of the 1930s and 40s had dropped away. Nevertheless, even in his later period, he held firm to the idea that higher set theory, which has no applications, is merely recreational.
Necessary in order to identify the problem, in order to gather data on the solution, but in all these cases, whether of mental entities or of linguistic phenomena, the ultimate explanation has got to be in the nervous system. The impossibility of even describing what a test might be, and that is a strong, perhaps conclusive basis for doubting that there's any meaning to the problem. So I think that this has to be put aside as a paradoxically meaningless issue. Paradoxical because of the vividness of its apparent meaning.
Ask yourself only, what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out? Never let yourself be diverted either by what you would wish to believe or by what you think could have beneficent social effects if it were believed.
That if you believe that these procedures do give you a proof, in other words, that if the algorithm says, yeah, it's true, then you believe that it is true because you've understood all the rules. You looked at the first one and said, yeah, that's okay. You looked at the second one and said, oh, yeah, I see, okay.
In that way, that if we are to live together and not die together, we must learn a kind of charity and a kind of tolerance, which is absolutely vital to the continuation of human life on this planet.
You cannot formalize your understanding in a scheme which you could put on a computer. You see, this statement which Gödel comes up with is something you can see on the basis of the same understanding that allows you to trust the rules, that it's true.
A sentence is only meaningful when we can verify it by experience, by some kind of, visual or auditory or whatever experience. When a sentence can't be verified, shown, proven, at least,
Mathematical Logic 1940 is a landmark text in the field of formal logic. Published in 1940 by Willard Van Orman Quine. This book has significantly shaped the understanding and application of logical reasoning. Quine's primary goal with mathematical logic was to demystify the intricacies of formal logic, making it accessible to a wider audience beyond mathematicians and logicians. He achieved this by presenting a clear and systematic exposition of first-order logic, a foundational framework for much of modern logical thought. A key contribution of the book lies in its rigorous formalization of logical concepts. Quine introduced a precise notation and a set of inference rules that allow for the formal analysis of logical arguments. This emphasis on formalization has had a profound impact on subsequent developments in logic, computer science, and philosophy. Beyond its technical contributions, mathematical logic is renowned for its clarity and precision. Quine's writing style is both rigorous and accessible,
making complex ideas understandable to a diverse readership. This clarity has made the book a valuable resource for students and researchers alike. The enduring influence of mathematical logic can be seen in numerous later works on logic, including Quine's own subsequent publications. It remains a cornerstone of logical study and continues to inspire new research and applications.
But random variation in their internal structure. The internal structure would correspond to what was going on in the nervous system, but they've been, our behavior has been whipped into shape. Those further mechanistic explanations, which we certainly want for a full understanding of the situation, are immaterial to the linguistic output, to the study of it as such. That all observational evidence for the theory, for our overall theory, would remain undisturbed by identifying these. Actually, this person is having the redness sensation where I'm having the green one. I can't picture on what basis we could link any kind of physical discovery with that.
Holism. The concept that complex behaviours and experiences can't be fully explained by breaking it down into its simplest components. Instead, it should be explained as a whole.
And what the drive does is it motivates the behaviors that will bring you back to the optimal state. So we could think about the hunger drive. So you have some particular storage of energy in your body that's optimal. You want to maintain some particular level of energy storage. Now, as you use up energy.
In 1951, Rogers introduced person-centered therapy, which involved clients reflecting on their problems subjectively. This method viewed the person as a whole instead of the sum of their component parts.
Reductionism. The belief that human behaviour is best explained by breaking it down into its simplest...
Hull proposed was that we could think about behaviors as being rewarding because they reduce drives. So when something is helping bring you back to some optimal state, whether it's your hunger drive or some other drive, then that bringing you back, that behavior is going to be rewarding. And this is slightly different from the standard behaviorist explanation.
One is evolutionary reductionism. This is a form of reductionism where situations are explained through evolutionary adaptiveness. An example of when reductionism is used in psychology is within the biological approach. This approach states that a person is a result of their physiology, e.g. genes, neuroanatomy, and neurotransmitters. This is reductionist as it is breaking a person down into each individual component of their biology.
The idea of drive reduction theory gives us a different way to think about how behaviors are rewarding. And think about, rather than the rewards themselves, like the food, think about their relationship to our drives and our motivation.
Quine's On What There Is 1948 is a classic philosophical paper that delves into the fundamental question of existence. Quine argues against Platonism, the view that abstract objects like numbers and properties exist independently of the mind. He proposes instead a more austere ontology, advocating for a desert landscape view where only concrete objects exist. Quine's central argument revolves around the concept of ontological commitment. He argues that our theories and language commit us to certain entities, and that we should be parsimonious in our ontology, only accepting entities that are necessary for our theories to be true. This leads him to reject abstract entities like numbers and properties, as he believes they are not necessary for our understanding of the world. Instead, Quine proposes a nominalist view, where only concrete objects exist. He argues that we can account for our mathematical and scientific theories without positing abstract entities, by treating them as mere linguistic constructs. Quine's paper has been influential in philosophy, particularly in the fields of metaphysics and philosophy of language. It has sparked debate and continues to be a topic of discussion among philosophers today. Semantic holism is a philosophical theory that states that the meaning of a word or sentence is determined by its relationship to other words and sentences within a language. Holism. He argues that our beliefs about the world are interconnected, and that we cannot understand the meaning of a single word or sentence without understanding the entire web of beliefs that it is part of. This means that our ontology, or our beliefs about what exists, is also interconnected with our language and our theories about the world. Semantic holism has important implications for our understanding of knowledge and truth. If the meaning of a word or sentence is determined by its relationship to other words and sentences, then it is possible for two people to use the same words to mean different things. This can lead to misunderstandings and disagreements, even if both people are using the same language. Semantic holism also challenges the idea that there is a single, objective truth about the world. If the meaning of our words is determined by our beliefs, then it is possible for different people to have different beliefs about the world, even if they are using the same language. This means that there may not be a single, objective answer to the question of what exists.
Possible cases in mathematics come to mind. There's something called the continuum hypothesis, having to do with the comparative sizes of certain infinite classes. Kurt Gödel and Paul J. Cohen have proved that this hypothesis can be neither proved nor disproved.
I don't think there's any clear answer to that question. I mean, the technical aspects of the theorem are understood. Means within a particular language of sufficient richness, you can't establish the truth of.
A different sort of mathematical case that comes to mind is the celebrated theorem due also to Gödel, to the effect that there can never be a complete formal proof procedure for what is called elementary number theory.
What does arithmetic tell us about the world? Where are the numbers? They're not in our minds. There are truths about the numbers, just the plain natural numbers, which we somehow grasp. But what are the things that that we're grasping?
As I already suggested in connection with the continuum hypothesis, plausibility considerations can augment existing codifications of accepted mathematical laws. Gödel's theorem shows that such augmentation can never yield any one finished system in which every truth of elementary number theory admits of proof.
No, I don't think so. I mean, linguistics does involve formal computational systems, but they're sufficiently elementary so that these questions don't arise. And if they did, it wouldn't matter. So they arise in physics, which uses.
Quine developed his thesis in accordance to well-meaningful theses of other scholars before him, which either fully or partially account for holism, according to Bowes. Quine here builds upon the broad contextual shoulders of the great logician Gottlob Frege, 1848 to 1925, creator of the first new logic since Aristotle, whose holistic context principle states that a word or phrase derives its meaning only from the entire context of a sentence, meaning then is context-dependent and arises only interdependently in relation to the causal nexus of the entire cultural tradition, not independently in isolation from the whole of this meta-language basis. Quine agrees with Wittgenstein that comprehending a proposition means comprehending a language philosophical investigations. For the mature Wittgenstein, all our beliefs are parts of a whole system of beliefs that constitute our form of life, or life world. Habermas, that is our worldview. Darshana, the whole system presupposes, includes and subsumes all our knowledge and belief. A sentence has meaning only in the context of A whole language in line with this, Bowes also affirms that the real, truth, meanings are not absolute, and are not independent of deed, interdependent intersubjective cognitive, cultural background information, and are preconscious, contingent, relative, conventional, and pragmatic, and this is ontological relativity, that is, what there is for human cognition supervenes upon our collective web of belief. What you believe is what you get.
All right, so let me begin by prefacing that I'm more interested in how this impacts aesthetics, ironically enough, because again, what Quine means for other fields is still hotly disputed, but there's no doubt it has very vast implications beyond philosophy to logic, mathematics, and a lot of adjoining fields.
Yeah, he combined two doctrines which have come, at least one of which attracted me a lot, but which I now think have had a bad influence on metaphysics. The Quine, of course, the question of ontology in its simplest.
So, Two Dogmas, I think, was published in a way to be a friendly criticism to positivism. Now, what is positivism? Positivism is really hard to define, but I would define it as the attempt to find a logical foundation for all disciplines, but primarily.
But then Quine broadened it by arguing that whenever you use a word like every or all, if you say someday, there are some rainy days this month.
It's not really possible to partition these two. And what he says is, using the notion of salve vortate, is that when we think that synonyms can retain truth value, it's not true. So take an obvious case like 1 + 1 will equal 2, and 2 will equal 1 + 1. Yes, no truth value is sacrificed.
You have prima facie committed yourself to an object or entity. If I say some numbers are greater than 1,000,000, I've committed myself, committed was his expression, sometimes called ontological commitment. I've committed myself to the existence of abstract entities. Unless you can somehow paraphrase, say, well.
In his influential essay, Two Dogmas of Empiricism, philosopher Willard Van Orman Quine challenges two central tenets of traditional empiricist thought. The first dogma is the distinction between analytic and synthetic statements. Analytic statements, according to this view, are true by definition, while synthetic statements require empirical verification. Quine argues that this distinction is ultimately untenable, as the concept of analyticity itself lacks a clear and consistent foundation. He contends that the meanings of our terms are intertwined with our overall web of beliefs and experiences, making it impossible to draw a sharp line between truths that are true by definition and those that are based on empirical evidence. The second dogma that Quine targets is reductionism, the belief that all meaningful statements can be reduced to statements about immediate sensory experience. This view, often associated with logical positivism, posits that the meaning of a statement lies in its empirical consequences, specifically in the observable sensations it predicts. Quine argues against this reductionist approach, asserting that our beliefs form a complex and interconnected network where any individual statement can be revised or rejected in light of new evidence or theoretical considerations. He emphasizes that our knowledge claims are not isolated units, but rather part of a holistic system that is constantly subject to revision and refinement.
We know what an unmarried person is not by the term, but what we know in terms of reality. So there's no way to necessarily keep the truth value in all statements. There's going to be some slippage between the various truth values of various statements, even for the same term, right? So you can have an unmarried man, but the unmarried man is not necessarily a bachelor.
Way. So this led to the idea of looking at our language to see what we're ontologically committed to. But a second doctrine of Quine's, which went to is that since he did not want to end up saying, well, we're committed to rainy days.
Whether positivists can really produce this logical language that they can, verify all these meanings for all these theoretical terms. And the positivist said they could. But he just points out the very simple examples, like the cat is brown, or the dog is blue, or whatever, or the house is, yellow. And he says to really try to cash these out, even these.
Quine invented. So Quine said, no, we're not really committed to the existence of all these things we quantify over. Really, all we need to take serious is science. And by science, he meant science as rewritten in the vocabulary of mathematical logic.
Quine has a simile which he thinks describes what we have come to understand by science. Total science is like a field of force whose boundary conditions are experience. A connect with experience at the periphery occasions readjustments in the interior of the field. Constant re-evaluation is necessary. This seems to me to have something in common with Popper's falsification principle, which states that only statements and theories that are falsifiable can be said to be scientifically true. Popper's principle is most useful on the periphery of Quine's field of force. Quine presses his simile further. Re-evaluation of some statements entails re-evaluation of others, because of their logical interconnections, the logical laws being in turn simply certain further statements of the system, certain further elements of the field. It follows that empirical content cannot be accurately described by an individual statement. No statement has immunity from revision. He points to paradigms of science, where Kepler superseded Ptolemy, or Einstein Newton, or Darwin Aristotle. Here we are reminded, though not by Quine, of Thomas Kuhn, and his work on the role of paradigms in science. Quine admits that descriptions of physical objects, appreciated on the basis of our common senses only, will do little to shake the great scheme of science. In other words, we are unlikely to be wrong when we say the chair is a chair. Such a concept is difficult to falsify or relate to any significant paradigm. Such observations he sees as far from the periphery of the model he has proposed, and therefore safe from revision. Modern theories of reality and consciousness reference might disagree. Presciently, he refers to all these descriptions as myths. The myth of physical objects is epistemologically superior to most in that it has proved more efficacious than other myths as a device for working a manageable structure into the ux of experience. In the 1951 version of the paper, he refers to the use of irrational numbers in mathematics, which have no ontological status, but which as intermediaries allow the proof of many relationships that do. He calls for the sake of argument devices of this kind posits. Furthermore, reductionism means that objects at the atomic level and beyond are posited to make the laws of macroscopic objects, and ultimately the laws of experience, simpler and more manageable, and we need not expect or demand full definition of atomic and subatomic entities in terms of macroscopic ones, any more than definition of macroscopic things in terms of sense data. Another sweeping statement which only a major philosopher would dare to make follows: physical objects, small and large, are not the only posits. Forces are another example, and indeed we are told nowadays that the boundary between energy and matter is obsolete. Moreover, the abstract entities which are the substance of mathematics, ultimately classes and classes of classes and so on, are another posit in the same spirit. Epistemologically these are myths on the same footing with physical objects and gods, neither better nor worse except for differences in the degree to which they expedite our dealings with sense experiences. We try desperately to reduce nature to common sense, but with increasing difficulty. As more and more science is discovered, its ontological borders in his field of force simile become more and more dias.
That had a little to do, I would say, with Quine's age, with his chronological period. He was born in 1908, so he lived when mathematical logic was a very young subject. And Principia Mathematica, I think the second volume came out in probably when Quine was about 11.
is really not possible. You could do it, but it would be so much effort, so strenuous, that it's not worth the time. So we're back to that this whole analytic-synthetic distinction turns out to be a complete myth, and this belief that there's a logical language waiting to somehow salvage that myth was also a myth.
However, there's a way of coping with this difficulty, and it is behaviorism, in the sense in which I think behaviorism is important and valuable. I think the role of behaviorism is the legitimation of mentalistic terms.
And so the excitement of mathematical logic, this idea that you can find out what there is by taking the best science and then rewriting it, not necessarily in the notation of Principia Mathematica, because Quine invented his own set theory, but in terms of the best symbolic logic.
Hence the name. They're just two dogmas that positivists really think that they can force on people, but don't really have any power. Now, in contrast to that picture, what Quine says, what we need to do is just abandon this notion of that these theoretical terms like truth, logic, or objectivity exist in a kind of metaphysical sense.
Without having to go through the indirect and, in fact, impracticable channel of neurology. Criteria, intersubjectively observable criteria for mental states are found.
That the new subject of mathematical logic would be the key to solving philosophical problems. But taken together, those two doctrines, what exists as far as we can tell, because science will change its mind, and we know that, but as far as we can tell, what exists or what we should bet on.
So once we abandon this idea of metaphysical objectivity or realism, what we recognize is that our scientific truths, even mathematical truths, are just pragmatic beliefs that happen to rest upon even larger sets of beliefs. So all we have are webs of beliefs that are sort of impinging upon one another, but this doesn't lead to anything bad, because
the extent to which I'm a behaviorist is in seeing behaviorism as a way of making objective sense of mentalistic concepts. I don't identify the mental states with the behavior. I identify the mental states rather with neural states.
The Daisy World model is a simplified Earth system model that illustrates how negative feedback loops can stabilize a planet's temperature. This model envisions a planet inhabited by two types of daisies, white and black. White daisies, with their high albedo, reflect more sunlight, leading to a cooling effect on the planet. Conversely, black daisies, with their low albedo, absorb more sunlight, warming the planet. As the sun's brightness gradually increases, the growth rates of the daisies are influenced by the planet's temperature. When the planet is too cold, black daisies thrive, absorbing more heat and warming the planet. As the planet warms, white daisies gain an advantage, reflecting more sunlight and cooling the planet. This interplay between the two types of daisies creates a negative feedback loop that stabilizes the planet's temperature over a significant range of solar luminosity. This model demonstrates how even simple life forms can interact with their environment in ways that regulate planetary conditions, highlighting the potential for life to play a significant role in shaping the habitability of a planet. In the context of Quine's two dogmas of empiricism, we can draw an analogy. White daisies can be likened to analytic statements, which are true by definition and provide a stable foundation for knowledge, preventing it from overheating into speculative metaphysics. Black daisies, on the other hand, can be compared to synthetic statements, which are derived from empirical observation and introduce new information, potentially leading to shifts in our understanding of the world. The sun's increasing brightness symbolizes the growth of knowledge, as new observations and theories emerge, potentially challenging existing beliefs and destabilizing the established order. Negative feedback loops, in this analogy, represent critical thinking. Critical thinking acts as a regulator, evaluating new information, identifying inconsistencies, and refining our understanding of the world, ensuring a balance between established truths and new discoveries. This analogy suggests that a healthy epistemological system, much like a stable climate, requires a balance between these two types of statements. While analytic statements provide a necessary foundation, they cannot remain static. Synthetic statements, derived from empirical observation and critical inquiry, are essential for adapting to a changing world. Just as the DAISY world model demonstrates the importance of negative feedback loops in maintaining a stable climate, critical thinking plays a crucial role in maintaining a balanced and evolving epistemological system. By constantly evaluating our beliefs and integrating new information, we can avoid the pitfalls of both dogmatic adherence to established truths and uncritical acceptance of every new idea.
Is what science says exists, and science came more and more to mean requiring just physics and physics rewritten in the language of mathematical logic. That, I think, leads to a kind of science worship, which I think has harmed the subject.
This is kind of a circular argument, but it's a virtuous circle because we can't get out of it. As human beings, we just are stuck with running in between analytic and synthetic truths that we have to keep adjusting pragmatically based on our experience. As he puts it, we have to keep readjusting our web of beliefs given recalcitrant experience that we encounter every day.
The position is not that there are only physical objects, there are also abstract objects.
But these abstract objects are not mental. It's important to make that distinction, isn't it? You don't believe in the existence of minds as separate from physical things, but you do believe in the existence of certain abstract entities.
Yes, numbers notably.
If you say that, for example, and for Quine, the problem with this, Quine would have been happy as a kind of materialist if you could say all that exists is physical objects. But he recognized that physics uses a lot of mathematics, and mathematics, he said, quantifies over abstract entities.
It seems like we can't even argue about these issues, but on Quine's understanding we can, because we would still have various standards we can appeal to. Like a theory should be short, it should be elegant, it should be convenient, it should be useful. So even if truthhood in a kind of metaphysical Platonic sense has been totally abandoned, we don't get rid of truth in any real sense.
I think from the, again, not from the point of view of the predicative side of philosophy, is not basically different from the status of hypothetical entities such as elementary particles in physics.
Quine's naturalized epistemology, at its core, seeks to recast epistemology within the framework of natural science. This involves a fundamental shift in perspective, moving away from traditional philosophical inquiries that prioritize abstract reasoning and a priori justifications for knowledge. Instead, Quine proposed that epistemology should focus on how humans actually acquire knowledge through their interactions with the world, drawing on insights from fields like psychology, neuroscience, and cognitive science. This shift necessitates a careful consideration of the linguistic tools and conceptual frameworks we employ in describing and understanding knowledge acquisition. The web of belief metaphor, central to Quine's thought, highlights the interconnected nature of our knowledge. Individual beliefs are not isolated entities, but rather intricately woven together, influencing and supporting one another. This interconnectedness has significant implications for the linguistic logic of our knowledge. The language we use to express and articulate our beliefs shapes our understanding of the world, and, consequently, influences how we acquire new knowledge. By emphasizing the role of language and the inherent limitations of our conceptual frameworks, Quine's naturalized epistemology underscores the importance of a critical and reflexive approach to knowledge acquisition. It encourages us to constantly examine the linguistic tools we employ, recognizing their potential biases and limitations. This critical awareness is crucial for ensuring that our pursuit of knowledge remains grounded in empirical reality and avoids falling prey to conceptual traps or linguistic pitfalls. This revised explanation attempts to address the linguistic logic inherent in Quine's naturalized epistemology by highlighting the significance of language in shaping our understanding of knowledge and the need for a critical examination of the linguistic tools we employ in our pursuit of knowledge.
And then in ethics, of course, the parallel problem was that G.E. Moore argued that the property of being good could not be identified with what Moore called a natural property, like being electrically charged, say. And so it must be a non-natural property.
Most people, being rational, will opt for a more scientific discourse. So the way out of this is to just argue through the actual communal standards we have. We don't need these metaphysical entities to do the work.
And these general hypotheses contain reference not only to the ordinary observable objects, but also to many auxiliary objects, we might say, in the way of unobservable physical particles, and also in the way of numbers and functions, because these come into the formulations, into the hypotheses of a quantitative kind.
Third dogma of empiricism: understanding equals raw experience plus conceptual scheme. Raw experience, sensory input, unfiltered and uninterpreted. Conceptual scheme, the framework of beliefs, concepts and language through which we organize and interpret raw experience. Key takeaway: the third dogma of empiricism posits that our understanding of the world is not a direct reflection of raw experience, but rather a product of that experience filtered through our existing conceptual framework. This framework shapes how we perceive, interpret, and make sense of the world around us. Note: this equation is a simplified representation and cannot fully capture the nuances of the third dogma of empiricism, which is a complex philosophical concept.
Well, along the middle of the century, I came out against what I called two dogmas of empiricism. One was the dichotomy, the basic dichotomy. More recently, Don, you came out against an alleged third dogma, and it's not altogether clear to me what that is.
Good. I'll do my best.
I think my attitude here is closer to Popper in the sense of stressing refutation rather than evidence and support. And the refutation comes in predicting no substantial homology between one individual's receptors and that neural hookup and another's. And in fact, it's in one of the earliest pages of Darwin's Origin of Species that I'm not persuaded even that the negative result is conclusive. That's a point where I certainly have eased up. But that the conclusiveness of the observation sentences themselves, what I now view as the solution, right. Namely the harmony of subjective standards of perceptual similarity between individuals, an intersubjective harmony of these subjective standards. But where his prowess comes in is in setting up a recursive definition that covers the ground in a finite space. Whereas if we left it at the level of disquotation, there are infinitely many